Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you and welcome to our second 7-Eleven committee meeting. My name is Barbara Franco. I'm your chairperson and happy to lead you through this meeting today. Our first order of business is roll call and establishment of a quorum. And I don't know if Nikki or Marie is going to do that.
Marie, let's have Marie do that, please.
Hey, Marie.
All right, so Eric Housley.
Here.
Arvin Nishal.
Present.
See Barbara Franco.
Here.
Courtney Garcia.
Here.
Danielle Barreca.
Here. Greg
Bennett.
Present.
Hector Gallegos.
Here.
Josh Schultz.
Here.
Perfect. Leon Browning.
Here.
Ted Ward.
Here.
Wade Woodward.
Present.
And then our alternates, Evan Bersolini.
Here.
Sylvia Regalado.
Present.
Perfect. And Steve Green. So if everyone present but Steve Green, that is a quorum.
All right, thank you so much. Our next item of business is the flag salute. And if we could have Principal Ward lead us in the flag salute, and if everyone would please stand, that would be great. Principal Ward.
Thank you, Chair Franco. Everybody, thank you for standing. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty, thank you. Okay. Our first couple of items of business is to receive a motion to approve this meeting's agenda. If I could get a motion from somebody.
I brought the motion for that.
Did you catch that, Marie?
I believe that was Arvin with the motion,
Arvin?
I'll second.
Yeah,
I'll
I
second.
will.
This is Josh.
and Josh seconded.
Okay, great. All right, so we have the agenda approved. Next line of business is acceptance of last month or last meeting's minutes. I'm sure you all received an email with all this information in it, so I am making that assumption that you have all that.
Sure, Franco, you may want to make sure everybody accepts the agenda, like all.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry about that.
All right, so we have a motion to accept the agenda and a second. Are we all in favor of accepting the agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Favor, yes.
Okay, that sounds like a acceptance. Now we'll go to the minutes. Is there a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting?
This is Leon. I so move.
Thank you, Leon.
Seconded.
And the second was that Josh?
Arvin.
Arvin.
Arvin, okay,
I second.
okay. And then all in favor of accepting the minutes as written and recorded, say aye.
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 Okay, all right, great. As I said, we all did receive an email that had all the attachments that the district folks will be going through with us today. So I'm hopeful that everyone has had a chance to at least look at those and browse through those in terms of preparation for today, for today's meeting. As we get started, I would like to ask Nikki if there is anybody waiting in the public comment arena.
I do not see any public comment at this time.
Okay, and had there been anybody in public comment, they would be making comments on any item that is not on the agenda today. So perhaps through the course of the meeting, there'll be others that will step forward. So with that, we're going to move forward to item number 3 on the agenda, the district's presentation. And then during this time, the committee will have opportunity to ask questions. Also, the district will be going back through their discussion and revisiting some of the inquiries that came through from the committee at our last meeting. So I think they'll be making their case, clearing up some questions that came through from the committee at our last meeting. And with that, I am going to, Mike, who's starting off here?
I will take it over from right now, Chair Franco. So thank you very much. Nikki, if you could put the presentation up on the screen so everybody could see that. And and I think all the members know they have a copy of the presentation that we'll be going over. So great. So yeah, this is our meeting number 2. So welcome everybody to today's meeting, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for the second meeting on our 7-11 committee as we consider CARNEROS Elementary School. We are going to first start off with some responses to committee member inquiries that were generated at the last meeting. If we did not seem to have hit all those questions, please let us know at some point. But I think we have all those inquiries embedded in this slide show. So if you go to the next slide, please. Just a quick recap and review of CARNEROS Elementary School, and there is one correction I want to make sure everybody is aware of. Again, the initial year of the construction of the school site was in 1950, and that was Building B, and you have the maps in your presentation that we'll show you in just a minute. And then Building A was in 1962. There was modernizations that have occurred in the years listed in the presentation, as well as when the new NPR, and NPR stands for multi-purpose room, or for those of you that are really old school, cafeteria is the other use of that, the explanation of that. And then there was a lunch structure that was erected as well. The property sits on a little over 9.7 acres, and approximately 3 acres is now existing with vineyards. There's the existing well and the pump house, 2 septic systems, one which was replaced in 2000. One of the questions that was asked is there a recycled water connection at the site? And that does not happen at this point. We could not find out from Napa Sands if it could ever have the recycled water connection, but currently the site does not have a recycled water connection. However, up and down Los Carneros, there are what they call the purple meters, and you can there is a possibility if someone wanted to connect to the recycled water connection, they could do that, but that would be through Napa Sanitation. And then finally, the water storage tanks on the property are there for fire suppression on that. If we go to the next slide. There was some inquiry around enrollment. So I went back and did about a 5 years worth of enrollment just to give everybody a picture of what the enrollment looked like. And this is the correction. I incorrectly had stated that the school had closed in June of 2011 and actually had closed in June of 2010, which makes a lot of sense because Stonebridge occupied the campus in August of 2011. That is correct. It would have been a real big turnover to move one site, move everybody off in less than 3 months to move the CARNEROS site off and then move the Stonebridge site back on. You can see the enrollment hovered, anywhere from a low of about 184 to a high of 239. And the district definitely starts looking at enrollments when they fall under 300, and definitely when they're falling under 250 is when we start to really look at enrollment. So that's just a brief recap of the enrollment at CARNEROS Elementary School. Next slide, please. There was a question about the vineyard. So the vineyard had been planted roughly 30 years ago. It was originally planted for about a little over 4 acres, as the slide says, and it was reduced to roughly 3 acres. And the reason it was reduced to roughly 3 acres is when Stonebridge acquired or was placed on the campus, they inquired about utilizing almost an acre for a school garden or for a garden for the school site, and they were granted permission to do that. So in being granted permission, they then took out approximately an acre of the vineyards that existed at that point. Records show that in 2010, when the district, when CARNEROS Elementary School still existed, there was a budget for maintenance and the harvest of a little over $13,000 for the vineyard, that the fruits was being sold to MUM Napa Valley, and that again was latest of 2010, and that the average income of approximately $25,000 was occurring on an annual basis, with the net being about $12,000 for the school district. And I believe a portion of that money, I don't have records to show how much, but a portion of that money was allocated to the site. Once Stonebridge took over the site, They then started to operate or maintain the vineyards, and they would have the grapes harvested and sold. Unfortunately, I could not get any information from Stonebridge, their records, to show what exactly they were having as far as any kind of net income or what was their budget for the vineyards. But I would suspect it is probably in the neighborhood of what we're seeing on this particular slide. Nikki, if you go to the next slide, please. So just again to orient yourself, because the next map is going to be the overlay of what was asked for, where the fault and the gas lines are located. So again, just to orient yourself, going on it's on the far left, going up north and south would be Los Carneros Avenue, and the portables 3, 4, and 6 that are currently still existing there. They are adjacent to Los Carneros Avenue. You can see where the multi-use room is. Then buildings B, or building B is referred to is B4, 5, 6, 7, and then building A is A1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the rest of the buildings, if they still exist, are modular or portable buildings that exist on the campus. You can see the parking lot again on the north upper left-hand side of the slide. And brown is that pump house that I referred to, or where the well is located. And then in the lower left are where the leach fields are currently located on that. So if you go to the next slide, then Nikki.
I have a question, Mike.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, Leon, sorry.
Where is the gas line, the 16-inch gas line?
Great, I'm going to get to that. So next slide, Nikki.
Okay.
So this slide has the property oriented just slightly different, but to answer your question, Leon, again, on if you're looking at the yellow line near the top, that's the gas line. And there is a driveway that leads to the properties just to the north of the site. And there's a driveway, and my understanding is it runs parallel with that particular driveway. What I've been told, and please do, I know I'm being recorded, so I guess I can be quoted on this, but the gas line originates out from the Central Valley, and then somehow, somewhere along the lines, transitions over into the Marin County area. Where it exactly terminates, I am not familiar with that.
Is it a PG&E line?
It is a PG&E line. That has been confirmed, yes.
Okay.
The fault line, when it ruptured in 2014, is the red line that you see on this slide, and then what represents the no build zone is the blue dashed lines that you see, and that's again 100 feet, within 100 feet of the earthquake line.
Whose determination is a no build zone?
DSA. So Division of State Architects has rules on this, and says that if it's within 100 feet, then you can't build. You can't build on that particular property. And again, this goes back to spending, in their estimation, that they do not want to see public money, taxpayer money, be spent on a school that sits within 100 feet of a fault zone.
Mike,
yeah, Rob.
You want to clarify a little bit? So when we say no build zone, so we're talking about for the school district, right? So that doesn't imply to somebody from the private sector or something like that. They would have to make their own determination. So
that's correct. Thank you, Rob. So what he's referring to, Leon, is that this is regarding to schools. As far as anything other than a school, I do not know the zoning or the requirements on that, but I do know that from a school district's perspective, or schools, that the Division of State Architects does not allow for building or modernizing anything within 100 feet of that particular site. And so you can see the majority of this campus is taken up by that no build zone.
So when we get the copy of the appraisal, will it mention that no build site?
Well, I would, well, for a couple things. So first off, the appraisal, remember, we're not sharing the appraisal with the committee. That's the appraisal is just for the school district. So we are not publishing the appraisal. But with that said, I would imagine no, because in terms of this no build zone, it applies for the school district, right? So for the school district, if, for example, we wanted to take bond money and rebuild Stonebridge Elementary School because we want to put a school there, DSA would say, no, you can't put it in that blue zone because it could potentially be a waste of taxpayer money. Now, in terms of somebody from the private sector doing that or an appraisal, it's something where, again, when we ultimately, assuming that we declare this property as excess, sell the property, all this information that we are disclosing as a part of the 7-Eleven process, we would of course disclose all of that information because it's known and it's part of the administrative record. But again, whether a private sector someone could do it, that's between them and potentially county zoning.
But a potential buyer of this property would be advised of this no build zone. Is that correct or not?
Well, Kelly, would you
don't-
like to address that? I mean, I think I've attempted to say that anything as a part of the 7-Eleven, I mean, it's public record.
Yeah.
We would provide all of that. Kelly, do you have anything to add other than what I said?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. The fact that there's a fault line running there would absolutely be disclosed. All of the records on that would be disclosed just per California law for any real property transaction. As far as it being described as a no build zone to a potential buyer, probably not, because again, we aren't experts on what the rules might be related to building a winery or a house or all the different types of things that might be able to be there in the future. That would be up to the buyer, the future buyer, to do their due diligence and confirm whether or not they're constricted based on the fact that there's a fault line running through there. School district construction is governed by specific rules under the Field Act that requires DSA oversight. And they have very specific requirements, which of course we're all very familiar with because me and Mike and Rob are all involved in school district construction projects. But we can't say whether that's a no build zone for other types of construction, other types of development.
Will the earthquake fault location be indicated in the appraisal or in any other data?
I believe he has that. I believe we've provided that information to the appraiser.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I see some hands. I'm gonna go Barb first, then Josh, and then Wade.
Mike or Rob, could you clarify that when Snow School was built, that it was built enough feet away so that it was not within the fault line that went through Snow School?
Yes, that is an option for school districts, is to use, if they have sufficient property to relocate a school to a new portion of the property, they are eligible to do that. And so that's what we did in Snow Elementary School. That was a potential option for Stonebridge, because of the size of the property, that was the potential. But as we disclosed earlier, not disclosed, as we discussed at the first meeting, it just wasn't economically feasible for us to do that. Josh?
Yeah, I think you just made my point, was that this problem was the source of the $50 million estimate or something like that to rebuild the school, because you would have to move most of the facilities.
Yep, correct. Thank you. Wade?
Did the 26-inch gas line, does DSA have a setback rule on that?
No, they did not. They did not come out with any kind of setback rule on the gas line. We had done, and now I'm getting into the weeds, but a company by the name of PlaceWorks came out and did a full study that was made public at a previous board meeting many years ago around the gas line, and in addition, and within the fault line as well too, and kind of gave the recommendations, from their recommendations regarding, what is the, how do I say this, what is the possibility of the gas line rupturing, is what was in that. And I don't remember the exact wording there, but there was obviously a potential risk of that gas line rupturing with another fault line, with another earthquake happening. But I'd have to pull that report to get more specifics on that particular topic on that. Leon.
Yeah, at the last meeting we had, you identified that gas line as a 16-inch.
No, actually, if I did, that was, I misspoke on that. It's approximately a 26-inch transmission line. It's a rather large line. Leon.
It seems like it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a rather large line. So then just to continue to orient people on this one, then there was a request to do some work on the site to trench the fault line to see where they were at. So there was reports done, and that where you see T1, T2, and T3 I believe we had Miller Pacific come out and do some trenching to do more investigation into this actual fault line. They'd like to know more about that. I'm not a geologist in any way, shape, or form. I'm not going to try and tell you exactly what the reasonings were they're behind, but I do know there was some interest in understanding more about the fault lines and what was happening on that particular site. So I'll stop and see if there's other questions regarding this particular site. Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Rem and Rob Manguala.
Thank you very much, Mike. If you want to, can you go to the next slide, please? So for the remainder of the slideshow, we would like to talk about some additional details that we learned about the property. Next slide, please. Kelly, if you'd like to speak about the parcel report and some of the definitions that we found, and these were shared with all the members as an attachment.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I think there was a question last time about just confirming that the zoning is in fact agricultural watershed for this property, which we did confirm. There is a whole list of potential uses that are allowed in that zoning. They're sort of unique, but we listed some of them on the slide. This is not an exhaustive list just because, you can look up the section. It doesn't really help to have the whole long list there. Agriculture is a main one within that zoning. And I know we've talked about wineries, so we included that on the list as well. For wineries, they can be grandfathered in if they were there prior to 1974, and otherwise you need a separate use permit from the county to have to operate a winery on the site. The other items listed up there are uses that are allowable without a separate permit, and then there's some additional uses like kennels and farm worker housing and landfill sites and a whole bunch of different things that can also be allowed with a separate permit. Also on the winery list, and I just called that out because I know that there was some talk about winery use last time. We did confirm that there is a minimum requirement to have 10 acres to put a winery on the site. This parcel is reported at about 9.7. Some options that may be out there include formal survey to confirm that acreage, also seeing whether there was any possibility for a lot line adjustment with one of the neighboring properties or something like that. So those are some things that could be considered, but it is a 10-acre minimum for operating a winery on the site.
Kelly, would you like to go ahead and speak to what we discovered? Again, first, before you do that, I do want to thank the members of the community that pushed us to kind of look at the exact size. But Kelly, if you want to go ahead and talk about what we think we have kind of going on in terms of the actual size of the property.
Sure. So the district has at least had informal discussions with a surveyor who will, I don't know if he has been formally contracted or not, but he has or will be contracted with the district to perform some survey work on that site. And he does believe that the legal acreage may actually be 10 and not 9.7. And that was based on, kind of looking at the overall site. And I think that the next step would be a formal survey that would confirm that. So we think there is the possibility that a winery could be placed on that site, and that's subject to confirmation.
And the district is committed to following up on that. We are in the process of obtaining a contract for that.
Any questions about that? That's kind of in a nutshell some of the uses that are possible on the site. And like I said, that's not the whole entire list, but they're sort of random all over the place uses. It is a constricted site in terms of zoning, but those are some of the main ones.
There was some concern about, is it ag preserve? Is it ag reserve? It's part of the ag preserve, everybody. So, I mean, that goes back to, when Napa first started establishing that, I think back in 1969, and then it's been, voted on periodically, but it's part of the ag preserve. But Kelly, what Kelly and Rob have shared about being ag watershed is the correct part of the parcel.
Yep.
Right. If there's no questions, we'll just go ahead and go to the next slide, please.
Okay, and there was also a question last time, which is always a great question, about use of proceeds from sale or lease of property and what that can be used for. And so the education code has very specific provisions about that. And it does vary depending on whether the property is sold or leased, as well as a whole bunch of other factors. But the main general rule is that a sale of property, or if you sell property or lease with option to purchase, then those proceeds are restricted to certain types of uses, which generally involve capital outlay or non-recurring maintenance costs. So what you're generally talking about there is putting the money back into facilities needs within the district. And there are exceptions to that. There's a general exception that's in the Ed Code, section 17462A, which has been on the books for a while, and that allows school districts to go to the state allocation board and essentially get permission to for some flexibility in spending for one-time purposes. And you have to satisfy the state allocation board that you don't have any needs for the next 10 years for certain types of facilities costs, and you actually surrender some of your funding eligibility for those purposes. In addition to that statute, which was already on the books, there was a bill that passed last year as a result of the COVID-19 fiscal crisis. So to help out school districts, the legislature revived this statute that had previously been in effect in 2016 and allows even greater flexibility in spending on the proceeds of sale of property. The rules are similar in the sense that you have to go to the state allocation board, but you don't have, it's more flexible. The state allocation board doesn't actually have to approve. You just have to make certifications to that board and then have a plan for the spending. So it's yet another provision that allows flexibility of spending, but it even allows a little bit more flexibility. And again, that was put back in place because of the fiscal crisis that everybody was facing last year. That is currently in place until 2024. And even after 2024, sale proceeds can still be spent in that flexible manner, even if, as long as the transaction was entered into prior to July 1st of 2024. When I say flexible, it doesn't mean you can spend it for anything under the sun. It still has to be for one-time expenditures. So the very common example that we see come up is that you can't spend sale proceeds, for example, to give all of your teachers a raise or pay salaries or benefits or anything like that. It can never be used for ongoing expenditures, but you can get permission, or under this current bill, you can get flexibility to spend for one-time purposes from the general fund. And then last bullet on that page, important distinction. Everything I just said applies to sale of property. For a lease of property, the proceeds are not restricted and can be placed in the general fund and spent pretty much in any way the district desires.
Question.
Yes, Leanne.
Yeah, has the district ever spent money of the sale of surplus properties, and there have been 3 or 4 in the last 10 years, for non-recurring maintenance costs and that sort of thing?
As far as I'm aware, Leon, we've only spent them on what's legally allowed. So I mean, these expenditures and the sales happened before I occurred. So my guess is that they all went into facilities related expenses as required. As you know, we're in the process, for example, of selling the old vintage farm property and we plan to use that money for the new vintage farm. So our intention is to fully do that. Just like it is with this, we recognize that we have a great deal of facilities needs. And so our intent is to spend this money on facilities related projects. We have a rather large list.
Is that facilities needs? What does that mean? Roofing, painting, striping parking lots and things like that, which is all short-term stuff?
Well, it's going to be all related. Usually when you look at a facilities plan, you're first going to look at the stuff that's related to safety. So the most important thing whenever you look at maintaining a facility is the safety of the facility. That's the number one thing. Is it about warm, safe, and dry? Is it about safety? A line in a parking lot, I wouldn't necessarily call that out as something as being a safety concern. But if you have a leaky roof, I would certainly say that's a safety concern. Unfortunately, we just don't get enough money from the government to support these projects. So
okay, thanks.
And if I can just add one thing to that, the specific statutory definition of what you're supposed to be spending sale proceeds on is capital outlay or non-recurring maintenance costs. So typically you wouldn't see that money used for things like routine painting of buildings and stuff like that. It's supposed to be put back into either major facilities costs or the types of things that Rob just described. You know, the roof is failing and we absolutely need to get in there and fix it because it's a safety concern. That would be the type of thing that it would be used for. So not something that's just routine and something that the district has to do to upkeep the building every couple of years. It's typically something more substantial than that, but there is gray area absolutely involved in what the difference between the two is.
I see Courtney and then Barb.
And the money from the sale of this property be put into our fiscal reserves?
Generally speaking, Kelly, there's caveats to this. I'll let you address it. But because this functioned as a school, it's of the more restrictive type. So I just putting it straight into the reserve and then using it, for example, reserve, it can be used for anything, right? So if I were to just put it in the reserve, and then that's essentially saying I could use it for a reoccurring cost, which Kelly just outlined is no, we can't. So I would say absolutely not in this case. If it's raw land that we've never used as a school, yes, based on the current statute. And then Kelly, go ahead and correct me if I'm incorrect on what I stated there.
No, I think that's right. I mean, the statutes get at what you use that money for. So usually there's a fund that it goes into specifically. So, but at the end of the day, it's all about how that money is used. If it's commingled with some other funds and then you use it for something that's not within the statutory definition, that's obviously would violate the statute.
All right, Barb and then Josh.
The question I have is either for Rob or Kelly. So if the property was to be sold, then does that come as a lump sum of money that the district is able to use? In my understanding, as we've been talking about, is to do ongoing maintenance kinds of things on existing school buildings that we can't do through Measure H monies or with the limited maintenance funds that come from the deferred maintenance monies that come from the state, not always being what they should be. A lot of the ongoing maintenance kinds of things have fallen aside. So question number one, the district would get a lump sum of money with a sale of the property versus a lease of the property, which would be, I don't know, so many millions of dollars a month or thousands of dollars a month, depending on what the sale of the property. I just wonder what is the financial benefit of the sale versus doing a lease, particularly with the property at CARNEROS.
That's a very good question. If you mind, can we defer that to the next slide? Because I actually do answer that on the next slide, if that's okay.
Good lead.
Josh and then Arvin.
Reading our mind there.
Go ahead, Josh.
So I apologize, I got some background noise there. I'm in a hotel in Manhattan. I just dropped off my daughter at college. But my question is, am I correct in assuming that the district, given its facilities needs, would have no interest in using this first exception of giving up 10 years of state facility fund eligibility to use this for something other than facilities?
That's absolutely correct, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Arvin.
My question is this, like in real estate, if you sell a property, I don't know whether it's capable to you or not, is it 1031 exchange or not?
No, we are not considering an exchange for the property. While the school district does have the opportunity to exchange property, we are looking in this case to sell it. So not necessarily exchanging for something. There are school districts that have previously exchanged. I don't know that it's necessarily considered a 1031 in terms of a school district. That'd be a question for Kelly. But I want to say San Francisco Unified has property at one point in time that they've exchanged, and it generates some income. This just isn't. It's not a very large piece of property. It's complicated. We don't see that as a potential use for the property in terms of exchanging it for another piece of property. Also, we're not looking at something where we'd be taxed on it, right? So if you're a private investor and you're doing a 1031 exchange, you're looking at the tax implications also, I would imagine, as a private investor. But From a school district, that's not our consideration. We're looking at selling the money and putting it back into our facilities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions on this slide? Josh, you have a follow-up question, or are you good? You're good, okay. All right, sounds like we're ready to go to the next slide, Nikki.
So Chair Franco, thank you for bringing up that question. I managed to slip this slide in just since you asked it. That's a 7-Eleven joke, right? We published it generally. So anyway, so there were some really good questions last time about sale versus lease. And we did try and do some research on it. We did hit some roadblocks. So I did reach out to a local land use attorney, Kevin Teague. I was not able to connect with him. I did leave him a message. So I did try and do some due diligence, but in terms of talking to others and doing a little bit of research, due to the uniqueness of this property, determining a lease value, it's very difficult, just like determining the value of the property, even in terms of a sale. But one thing that we do know for certain is that when you lease property, and again, some of the real estate realtors in the audience here can correct me here, a lease will generally produce only a fraction of what you'll get in terms of a sale. There's different percentages that people use or that investors use. I mean, I don't know, is it 3% of the value of the property or 5%? But there's a couple of very large concerns about the district, continuing to maintain it. One is definitely, like we've expressed, we need these funds in terms of putting it into our facilities. There are some maintenance issues. So since the school does fall under the Division of State Architects, we know like the big picture thing is we know we'll get a larger amount if we sell it than we would get on a month-to-month basis for a lease. It's difficult to determine the exact value of what that lease would be for a comparison purpose, but we know that it would be a fraction. If we were to continue to hold the property, there would certainly be some carrying costs if we hold the property. And for example, if something were to go wrong with it, like it needs a new roof, we don't have the ability to do it because of where the property is located in terms of the earthquake zone and our relationship to the Division of State Architects. So we think at this time, again, that sale is definitely in the best interest of the school district, and this is what staff is recommending. Any questions related to that?
Question.
Yes, Leon.
Could you give us a list of the needs that you have for these funds if it comes from a sale? Could you tell us what properties or what schools and what uses of the funds you would have?
Yeah, we could actually do that. We could do that, Leon. We back in January, we had we can try to send you the link on this, but we did have a board. Yes, we did a board study session, and then we had a formal adoption of what we call our modernization program plan, and we did a thorough, in-depth study of our school sites and what their needs are, just from a warm, safe, and dry perspective. To give us a really good, clear picture of what are going to be the needs of Napa Valley Unified School District sites that are not the newer sites, that are the our older sites that we have. So we do have that available.
Oh, good. That would be nice to see that.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions related to this topic? Next slide, please.
Oh, hang on. Sylvia had a question. Sorry, Rob.
No worries. Sorry. Thank you so much. I just wanted to do another follow-up to the question that was just asked by Leon. Is there a way of looking at like a prioritization of that modernization list of where the funds would be utilized, and also having some kind of analysis with declining enrollment? Like, would money be going to a school that could potentially in 2 to 3 years, 5 years be closing due to declining enrollment, just to have a more accurate picture of how the monies are reinvested into the schools long term?
Yeah, Sylvia, excellent question. So yes, we do not have what we prioritized was every site that is not new. So we did not do a study on, let's say, for example, Snow Elementary School or Willow Elementary School, but we did of all of our other school sites. We could, if we get to that point, we could prioritize what we wanted to get done. It just depends on the amount of money that we have. But we could prioritize, if we want to do roofing throughout the entire school district, for instance, on that. And then we have done some work around currently, and speaking of roofing, we have done a study on our roofs. And so we do know which ones of our roofs are the ones that are we have several that are in serious need, but there are roofs that are worse than others, but they're all having some issues with them. And so we do have that to help guide us. But as far as prioritizing what I refer to as a modernization program plan, no, we have not done that, but we would prioritize it by the site and how new the site was. So if it was a new site, like I said, we did not do a study on that particular site. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry, I lost.
Oh, no worries. Just in terms of looking at declining enrollment in the district, like how we would not reinvest in a school that could potentially close in, 3 to 5 years.
So we did a study on each one of our school sites, but so that was part of the overall plan. However, going forward, when we were to execute on doing some work at sites, we would have to most certainly take into consideration, future enrollment and any kind of future school closures. We're very committed to not investing money into a particular site that potentially could be closed. That is just not a good use of taxpayer money or any money, quite frankly. And we want to make sure that we're being very thoughtful before we do work at any particular site.
Thank you.
Barb, you have a question. You're welcome.
Yeah, I just wanted to let people be rest assured, there is a Measure H committee that oversees the spending of the Measure H bond money. And there has been a lot of hard decisions made by that committee with regard to projects that were initially laid out in the bond that did not come to completion because of declining enrollment and because of the changing attendance patterns in the district. So let's see, is it Gabrielle? Sylvia. So Sylvia, the district, from my experience being on Measure H, it has really been diligent about being cautious with Measure H funds with regard to schools who are beginning to hover at that 350, 300 and enrollment numbers. And so I would just say that the district is already working in that kind of a view.
Okay, any other questions?
Well, I have a comment. I think that Sylvia asked such very complex and excellent questions. I think you ought to consider having her on your panel when you do look into these things.
So noted, Leon. Thank you. Okay, Nikki, I think we can go to the next slide. I think Rob and Kelly, this is still you as well.
Correct. So, there you go, appraisal request. So legal counsel is contracting for the preparation of 2 separate appraisals for the property. We do appreciate counsel, or not, I shouldn't say counsel, we do appreciate the 7-Eleven committee recommending that we get more than one appraisal. It has been a little bit difficult in terms of obtaining them. We've worked a lot in the background because it's there's a lot of weight for this work right now. It's very competitive out there. Lots of appraisals are being done. Kelly Rem has been working with 2 reputable firms. And then again, like we mentioned at the previous meeting, the appraisals will be kept confidential as attorney-client privilege in order to protect the district's bargaining position in future negotiations if applicable, assuming that we declare this property as excess. Any questions about this slide?
I have a question.
Leon?
Are the appraisers being given a list of information to approach these appraisals according to the way you want to receive them, as far as the quantity of information and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So we're sharing as much information as we have related to the property so that we can get the most accurate appraisal as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Nikki, if you go to the next slide. Chair Franco, this is your slide.
Yes, I think this is time now for us as a committee to really think about the information that we've heard today and ask other clarifying questions to staff and amongst each other in terms of what information we need to have to move perhaps to a place where we've made a decision whether we should recommend a sale or a lease. If we, what else do we, if we're not at that position, what other kind of information do we need to have to be able to get to a place where we make a recommendation to the board? And remember, that is what we do. We make the recommendation. The board ultimately makes the decision to surplus the property or lease the property, depending on what recommendation comes forward from 7-Eleven committee. I think that we've gained a lot of information about the CARNEROS property in terms of the district ever needing that property to put students in those buildings. I think all of us can recognize that that's not in our near future. And I think that what I would like to do now is open up questions to the committee so that all 11 of us can get comfortable at a place where we either need other information from the district or we feel like we understand what the issues are and that the district is moving to a place of wanting to declare the CARNEROS property as surplus. So I'd like to just open it up to discussion. Staff is available. Mike and Kelly and Rob, we can ask them any questions that we need or information that we potentially need. So Leon, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to disclose the appraisals to the committee so that we could see what we're dealing with. And also there's got to be some sort of, if you're talking about a lease is payable monthly or annually. Of course, you don't get as much money in each payment as you would if you sold it, but over time you get probably or likely more money than you would expect. So, I mean, I'm not sure how we could decide on whether to lease it. I mean, what's the lease potential? What's it worth monthly or annually? Do we know that, or will we know that? Because you're looking at a financial situation here, and you're asking us to answer a question, and we don't have enough information to answer these questions. Thank you.
Well, one of the things I heard with the lease is that if the district was to lease the property, there is still expenses to the district in terms of the use of that property. So that just by leasing it, they still have expenses incurred, which I am not sure that that's what they want. Is that correct, Mike?
That would be correct, Chair Franco.
Yeah.
But it depends on how you write the lease. If you write the lease and let the lessee take it over for the entire lease period and pay for all the costs, that's one way to deal with it. Or you could pay for the cost yourself. You probably wouldn't want to do that because it's an older property, older buildings, older leach fields and vineyards and stuff like that. These are things that we need to talk about before we can make this decision, I think.
Leon's correct about the different types of leases that could be written. I think for all the committee members to know that, from our perspective as staff's perspective of the district, we just have such, immediate needs at our school sites that the sale of the property would help address those immediate needs versus a lease would not address our immediate needs because we would not be gaining as much money on an annual basis. It's hard to speculate. Leon could be correct that it could have more. There could be more income over a significant period of time. There may not be. It's hard to understand, hard to predict that. And as Rob mentioned, it was difficult to get someone to provide us with some kind of information on the lease. If our needs weren't so immediate and weren't so pronounced amongst many of our school sites, I think staff would be recommending or potentially looking at that lease option. But because our needs are so great from a facility standpoint and so pervasive throughout our entire district, the recommendation from staff is for the sale to be able to use that money pretty quickly.
Yeah, and if I could add something in there too. So first off, Leon, I appreciate you bringing this back up again, but just as a reminder, this isn't a typical piece of property. So for example, if we had some commercial real estate where, we had some buildings, we knew the square footage and we knew where obviously the type of tenant that you would attract, we could get an accurate lease that we could bring to a committee and we could consider that data. But when you're looking at a piece of property that sits on an earthquake fault with a gas line in front of it, that is a former school that was built over various periods of time, some as far back as the 1950s, it's going, no matter what number we get, it's not necessarily going to be a perfect number. But one thing we do know from, and again, I love to hear some of the comments from some of the realtors in the group, that when you lease, it will be a fraction of what we would get in terms of what the sale price is worth. So we know it's going to be a fraction of it. We just don't necessarily know, is it 3%? Is it 4%? Is it 5%? But, you know, we have to also consider, you know, the time value of money. The district has needs now. You know, if we were a young investor considering something like this, we'd have a different outlook. If we were a young investor, not a school district, we'd say, yeah, maybe I want to hold on to this property. I'm 30 years old. I could hold this for my future retirement. It'll generate money, you know, potential income generating property. That's a different stance than a school district. You know, school districts holding on to property for long periods of time. You know, our stance is it's not necessarily in our best interest. Our interests are in maintaining the properties that we have. As you know, we've closed some schools, and our property stance and our property strategy is to try and get the most money possible for those property in terms of a sale eventually, and then investing that into our existing facilities because we know we have the need.
You know, you've already owned the property for 72 years, so it's not something new. And if you're going to have appraisals, your appraisers can tell you what it would lease for or what the market is for the lease. They can give you information. So, I mean, I don't think that's the issue. What I think is you're asking us too quickly to make a decision on something. You really want to sell it, but is that really the right thing to do? And if you're asking for this committee to tell you what's the right thing to do, I don't think we have enough information yet.
Okay, we have some other comments. Danielle?
Thank you. I'm a residential realtor, so I don't deal in commercial leases, but I will agree that this property is unique. This seller is unique. So it's not the traditional LLC or even an individual that would be purchasing the property. So I think we do need to look through it through that lens. I think a lease agreement would have ongoing complexities and responsibilities on the district. Maintenance that would be ongoing, which if the school district needs this money, it's an immediate factor. Spending money on maintaining the property doesn't seem like the most fiscally agreeable decision there. So in my opinion, I think just having this unique property and being in this unique position, we do need more information, but leasing it is a less attractive option, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Courtney.
Thank you. A couple of questions. If we were to lease this property, would the district still be required to carry the insurance for the property? And what sort of liability would the district have should we lease the property and something catastrophic happens, like we have another, this happens to be the anniversary of the big giant earthquake today. If anybody didn't realize that. Thank you, Facebook, for the reminders. But should we have another large earthquake on that fault line with that gas line that runs through there, what liability would the district have should something horrible happen? And then also, Mike, you had mentioned earlier that we have restrictions on being able to spend public funds on property that lies within the certain area of that fault line. If we were to lease that property, would those restrictions, because we're not using it as a school, would those restrictions still apply because we are using the money of public funds? Would we not be able to keep maintaining the buildings that are currently there? Would we have to move them for the lease?
We would have to do some investigation on that, Courtney, to determine that exact nature, those exact answers to those questions. I don't know, Kelly Rim, if you know that, if you've come across this in any place where, you know, a school site in a similar situation was trying to lease a property, but had an active, or not active, but had an earthquake fault line with a no build zone, how that applies if the district's leasing the property, if you know anything about that. So maybe you comment on that.
I think that it doesn't necessarily, it just depends on what the lessee or tenant wants to do. So if whether they're going to buy the property or lease the property, I don't think it matters that the district is the landlord versus the buyer in terms of what the money can be, you know, that's still governed by those statutes. I do think the first part of your question about insurance and liability issues is all a matter of negotiating the terms of the lease. So we really have no idea what that would look like until we would go through a process to select a tenant and negotiate a lease with them, which is a whole process. But I think the fact that there's a fault line there and the fact that there's the gas line and the fault line intersecting and everything else would come into play. And what would then probably happen is that the district would have less leverage to require all of the insurance, you know, and liability to be shifted to the tenant because of those issues. And if the more that you shift those burdens to the tenant, the less money they're going to pay in rent, which means less money to the district. So there's no specific answer in terms of who's going to carry the insurance and what amounts and who's going to be liable for what, but that would all be worked out in the terms of the lease. And it kind of depends, you know, we've done ground leases with school districts before where it's virtually the same as a sale, except that the district technically still owns the site. And whenever you have one of those, there's always still going to be some level of liability on the district, no matter what. You can't, if the district's the tenant, the landlord, there's always going to be some level of liability remaining with the district, which is one of the kind of big downsides to leasing property.
Yeah, I just wonder if it opens us up for lawsuits should anything happen.
Eric Housley.
So I'm gonna intend not to babble because I think I have too much like different areas. I have a land lease for a vineyard. I was getting $5,000 per acre for the vineyard itself. I've reached out to a couple of friends in vineyard management that have said that is a pretty standard amount per acre for just straight vineyard land. I think what we have that's different, because I did discuss with the Justin Sienna group when they were doing the land lease on the front part of their location. The difference in that scenario is you're in an area that you could put a home that they could also negotiate part of the revenue as well that came into that. So if we were trying to do this with New Tech High School and you're near downtown, you could not only negotiate the land lease, but then also a percentage of the revenue over a long term that might be more. But in this scenario, because you're out in an agricultural area with a lot of limitations and buildings that really are not usable for most businesses, you're looking at, okay, call it $50,000 a year. Even after 10 years, you've brought in $500,000. I mean, for the district in the scenario that we're at, it makes more sense for me. And I was the one that was asking the questions about the land lease to make sure I was wrong. And I referred Rob to Kevin Teague and to some others. But I also did some calls on my own to kind of find out the same. For my purposes in thinking of this, and I understand where Leon's coming from to get more information. I think no matter what information we're going to get in this scenario, there could be a million and one scenarios of, okay, well, does somebody want to put a retirement home on there? Let's start making calls. And what would they be willing to pay? And would somebody be willing to put an X on there? And I think the problem is it's all negotiation until it finally comes together. And realistically, the chances of a good lease that will give us a return on our investment, as well as extra return to justify larger revenue stream long-term, doesn't seem to be as important as the you know what we're in right now, based on the fact that the way things went financially and took us into, you know, nearing the reserves at the low 3% level. So to me, this is kind of a timing issue. So if we did have time and we were sitting with 8, 10, 12% reserves, then I could say, yeah, let's take a little time, look at these things. But I don't see any kind, I mean, even if they paid us double what the going rate is, and that I'm near the Stag's Leap district, that's going to get a different rate than CARNEROS. There's just, and because it's under 10 acres, you can't have, you'd need a long-term lease that you could get somebody to be able to build a winery. So I purposely asked the question because I didn't want to kind of go into that mindset. Secondarily, I do all the property management for my family. So I do all the negotiations of leases with restaurants and other stuff in terms of how you do rev shares as well. I just don't see it as anything that is in our best interest in this location. Some of the other properties different, possibly, because all of a sudden there's a supply and demand issue, like my suggestion of New Tech High being near the downtown area and how much downtown is growing. So I think it puts it in a different scenario because of where we're out and the proximity that we're at. So while I understand Leon's point of needing more information, I don't know that I agree of needing it, because I think we've got, this isn't even apples to oranges comparison. We're not even on the same ballpark right now in terms of what a lease would bring us over the next 30 years. We would finally get up to where we would need to be, what we could probably sell the property for at the current time. So that's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Joshua.
Yeah, my question was just, Mike, you talked about the modernization studies and the unfunded needs. Can you give us a rough order of magnitude on the dollar value of those unfunded needs, facility needs for the district right now? Is it 5 million, 10 million, 100 million?
It is in a little over, let me think, I have it somewhere, hang on. It's about, just in the modernization, it is between 184 and $220 million.
Thank you.
Let's see, Stephen Green, Mr. Green.
Hi, this isn't so much a question as a suggestion to the chair, and that is, I'm hearing a couple of themes here, and one of them is that we need to make sure that we make a good decision and we evaluate everything as best possible that would go into the decisions. And also, I'm hearing a lot of great information. I was going to suggest that maybe the way to approach this to allay any concerns would be to create a decision matrix and identify the key things that we want to accomplish with the sale or not of the CARNEROS property. For example, I'm hearing that liability, basically eliminating liability is a key thing that we want to accomplish. And we could even put that on a weighted scale. Another one is maximizing funding for infusion to facilities. Another would be minimizing cost to the district of whatever decision is that's made. And then using that a matrix like that, you could assign weights to it, assign a number, and figure out, have a very clear and open way to describe how we made the decision, and also that if anyone has any concerns, we can address them in that way.
Okay, thank you. Arvin.
Yes, Barbara, we have so many scenarios on this property, but I think what's my suggestion is to, instead of leasing the property, we should sell the property, because the district needs the funds to do something maybe different. And the leasing will take a long time when they will be able to recover most of the money from the property. So selling is the right move to do it, I think so. That's my suggestion to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ask Kelly a quick question before I go back to Stephen and Sylvia. Kelly, what kind of trends are you seeing across this area in terms of districts that are with declining enrollment and looking at the sale of properties? What kinds of directions, or does it depend on all of the different factors that the committee has brought up?
No, I think that's a great question. And I will say I work with school districts all over the state, particularly in the Bay Area. Most of the districts I'm working with who are looking at surplus property are looking to sell. And a lot of times it is because of declining enrollment. The one exception to that is I work with a couple of school districts down in San Jose area that are pretty consistently leasing property, and we're seeing that start to shift too. I don't know if anyone follows the news down there. The reason for that is city politics and what they've been willing to approve in the past. And so we have a lot of school districts down there that are leasing to private schools and childcare facilities because they feel more limited. We are starting to see that change. So that doesn't apply, obviously, in this case. I would say that's kind of the exception, and most of the districts I work with are looking to sell. And again, you know, the Bay Area land is even more lucrative than many other parts of the state. So it's just, and again, also because of the current flexibility of spending sale proceeds, we're seeing a huge uptick in sale of property, but still with the thought of making sure that the property is not going to be needed for school purposes in the future.
Okay, all right, thank you. Back to Stephen. Mr. Green?
Yes.
We're coming, do you have something to add?
Oh, I didn't take the hand down. No, there was just, my suggestion was for creating the decision matrix.
Okay, yeah, we got that. All right, thank you. Sylvia?
Thank you. I have a clarification question with regards to the appraisal and the disclosure of the appraisal to the committee. Is that as a general practice? Is it just in this instance? I'm not familiar with that and wanted a little bit of clarification, and then I have a follow-up depending on the answer.
Yes, I can talk to that, and then Kelly, if you want to follow up afterwards. So in terms of not disclosing that as a term for the committee, if we disclose that to the committee, then we need to disclose that to the public. And we do feel that, again, if we were to get an appraisal for this, that it could potentially put a floor on the value of the property. Ultimately, as a school district, you know, while appraisal is important, the most important thing is that we will be marketing the property. We will put it out. We would publish an RFP. There's a process to follow for that, where we would approach the buyer with the most solid purchase plan and ideally with the highest price. So ultimately, the value of the property is determined by the market. Appraisals sometimes get that right, sometimes they get that wrong. And so again, let's just come up with a scenario. Again, worst case scenario, we get a really low appraisal, and then if we go to market that and we were to publish that, that would potentially limit the purchase offers that we get on the property. Kelly, can you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I can add, again, just my perspective working with a lot of other districts as well, that is very typical and it's what we recommend. And it's just to protect the district's position moving forward in that bargaining per that negotiation process. The one other thing I just want to add is, you know, I can appreciate wanting that information. So I don't want to take away from that. But please also realize, and I think Mike or Rob alluded to this earlier, the appraisal industry is more inundated right now than I've ever seen. And we're looking at 60 to 90 days before we'll be getting those reports back. So this isn't something we're going to get next week or tomorrow that could then be shared with the committee. It's going to take some time. And that's okay, because the district's not going to sell the site tomorrow. There's a process that has to be gone through. But I just kind of wanted to add that this isn't something that we're waiting for it to come through the email any minute.
And then Kelly, could you add a little bit to explain to the group explain the competitive process? So because I hear the concerns in the group, but I think the big thing is we're not purchasing a piece of property. So it's not like, you know, we need to get an appraisal because there's a chance for us that we're actually overpaying for the property. It's the opposite. We want somebody else to overpay for the property, and to ensure that we follow a competitive process. It is outlined in Ed Code. So if you'd like to just explain it to the group, it would be super helpful.
Yeah, happy to. So this is kind of the first step in the process, is to convene this committee and see what they have to say about recommendations for use of the site. After that, there's some statutory noticing that goes on, which basically means, for example, the district would notify the county that this site is potentially going to be sold. And if the county is interested, they would maybe negotiate in good faith. There's no express requirement to sell to them. Once you get past that, it's competitive bidding, which basically means you put the property out to bid and you sell to the highest bidder. Now, what many districts do, and what this district has done in the past with other properties, is seek a waiver from the state of California. I think we talked about that very briefly at the first meeting, which would still require a competitive process, but just allows a little bit more flexibility so that you're not just going out and saying, give us your highest offer for the site. It actually allows you to get competitive proposals in from qualified developers or buyers, and you'd still be looking at price, but you'd also be able to negotiate. You'd be able to look at who's this buyer, what are their terms, and all of those different things. So no matter what, there will be a competitive process required, whether it's the competitive bid requirement or with the waiver and the competitive negotiation. But in both instances, there are timing requirements, there are notification requirements, there are specific conditions that would come from the State Board of Education in the event of a waiver, and all of that has to be followed. And it is typically a process that takes months to complete.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more people, and then I have a couple of questions that I want to ask the committee. So Wade, you have a couple of question or comment?
Yeah, I think Kelly was kind of hitting on it right there. If we come to the agreement that we think it's surplus property and it should be sold, what happens if it doesn't hit a price that the district deems acceptable? I mean, we're assuming it's going to be acceptable. What happens if it doesn't?
Great question. The district would never be under any obligation to sell. I mean, again, obviously this committee's role is very, very important. So I don't want this to take away from that in any way, but the recommendation you make is advisory, and the board can decide to adopt it or not. They may disagree and decide they don't want to sell the property, and that's their prerogative. But assuming that they do, even at that point, if they put it out to bid or out with an RFP and seek proposals, and they don't get anything, that's again where the appraisal comes into play, because now we at least have something to go by, something informative to let us know whether or not these proposals are competitive. And if they aren't, or there aren't any proposals, then the district kind of goes back to square one and decides, do we hold on to the property for a little while? What do we want to do instead? Do we go out with another proposal? I work with another County Office of Education that went through a competitive process 3 times, and we just went into escrow again. So you just never know what happens, but the board would not be obligated to move forward if they don't get an offer that is what they deem acceptable.
Thank you.
And as a highlight right there too, Kelly. So just as a reminder too, is then again, assuming that the property is declared excess, we market the property, we get some bids on the property. The board would absolutely consider the purchase evaluation what we think the value is worth, right? So they're going to look at all of that together. And sometimes it takes multiple times, like you outlined. So then just again, reminding the group of what happened with the Vintage Farm, we did go through kind of multiple scenarios before we landed on a good purchase price and with a good bidder.
Okay, Leon.
Yeah, now I think that you've disclosed already you're going to have 2 appraisals. Sooner or later, buyers in the market are going to want to see them. And how are you going to decide when to disclose these appraisals to the market itself, so people can know whether they're, what they're buying is worth what you're asking or what they're willing to spend? Thank you.
Kelly, we're not required to disclose that, which is why it's attorney-client privilege, correct?
Correct. And I would say that while I can't say it never happens, it would be unusual in a school district bid process to disclose that information and just make it public. That has not been my experience, because you want these buyers to determine what they believe the property is worth and make their best offer.
Well, suppose they all come in below the appraisal value, then what do you do?
And that could happen. And that's goes back to, I think it was Wade's question, which is the board has a decision to make. Do we try again? Or at that point, they could decide, there's always the possibility the district could decide to disclose the appraisals if they wanted to try to get higher offers. But I just think you create risk by doing that, because now you've set, this is what we think the value is. That's the impression that's going to get created.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, I want to just do a couple of summary items different things that have come up in our discussion, and great discussion. And I think that we've all gotten a lot of questions answered and some clarifications made. And certainly have gone a little bit deeper in certain areas and learned some things about sales and, oops,
Uh-oh.
Nikki,
Yeah,
is that static coming from,
it's, I canceled the share for right now.
It sounds like the audio,
okay,
so maybe what we could do, Barb, if everybody who, except for Barb, if you could just mute momentarily until we can figure out where that background noise is coming from. And then if you have a question, when you raise your hand, you can unmute. I think that would be a good spot. So I'm going to start by modeling that and just muting myself. If everybody else could do the same, that would be great, except for Chair Franco.
all right, that's better. Good suggestion. Thanks, Rob. I want to just say that one of our responsibility is just to make a recommendation to the board, and staff is seeking a recommendation to surplus the CARNEROS property for sale. And I'm curious if much of the discussion I think that's taken place today will certainly be discussion that will take place at the board level. Also, in the report that's compiled that goes to the board with our recommendation, we're also able to bullet in that report certain areas that we think the board needs to consider in terms of their decision whether to surplus the property, because they will vote on that. Again, we just recommend. And so I am getting a sense that just to sort of see where people are at, to see if we have a motion to make a recommendation to surplus the CARNEROS property for sale to the Board of Education. Is there anybody that could make a motion for that purpose?
I'll move to surplus the CARNEROS property. I'm in that position.
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second to make a recommendation to surplus the CARNEROS property for sale. With that, we will Kelly, I take a vote, or do I open it up for discussion again?
You want to make sure there's no public comment as well
Right.
before there's a vote.
Okay.
And then if there's any further discussion.
Okay, before, Kelly, I do that before we take a vote, right? The public discussion? Okay. Nikki, do we have any buddy in the audience for public comment?
There is no public comment at this time.
Okay, so there's no public comment.
I have a question though.
Who has a question?
I do, Leon Browning. Are we voting to sell and or lease the property, or are we simply voting to sell the property?
In my review of the agenda, the district is looking to sell. Am I, Mike, you want to?
That is correct. The district is recommending the sale of the property.
The sale of the property.
Well, could I ask clarification? I think that's the motion I heard as well, right? I mean,
Motion, correct.
the motion on the table was to sell.
Correct. So we have a motion on the table that's been seconded. There's no public comment. I would like to take a roll call vote at this time to see where we are, I believe, in terms of forwarding this recommendation to the Board of Education.
Just a point of clarification, Barb. Kelly, should there be opening up for discussion right now?
If there's any further comment or discussion, and now would be the time, but then it would be roll call vote.
Okay, all right, thank you. So committee, thank you, Kelly. I'm trying to always remember the steps and the protocols. I'm glad you're there to help. So with that, is there any other discussion from the committee prior to us taking a vote? Okay, I don't see any. I don't see any hands. So with that, Nikki, can you do the roll call vote?
That would
All right,
actually,
I'll do
that would
that.
actually be Marie.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Marie. Sorry, Nikki and Marie. I used to seeing you two together.
No worries. Let's see here. Eric Housley,
Yes.
Arvin Nishal,
Yes.
Barbara Franco,
Yes.
Courtney motions, Danielle Barreca,
Yes.
Greg Bennett,
Yes.
Hector Gallegos,
Hector, you might have to unmute.
I'll come back to Hector. Josh Schultz,
Yes.
Leon Ronning,
Yes.
Ted Ward,
Yes.
Wade motion, so back to Hector.
And what about Courtney?
I will ask her and also Wade here in just a moment.
Okay.
Hector Gallegos, do you have a vote at this time?
Trying to text him. Sorry, guys. See if I can get him.
Courtney Garcia, your vote?
Yes.
And Wade, we read yours.
Yes.
See if Hector is able to send a vote.
Hang on, everybody.
Hector Gallegos, are you able to vote at this time?
Sorry to step out. Did Hector vote or not?
No.
Okay. Kelly Ram, I'm going to need some advice here because I show him on the screen, but he's not unmuting too, so we can't hear his vote.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the motion's going to carry either way. I think given that we've given him a few minutes and don't know what's going on, I would list him as having not been present during the vote and that it was a vote of 10 with 1 absent. Unless we want to wait a few more minutes, but if he doesn't come back on in a few minutes, then we don't have his vote.
Why don't we wrap up with some of the housekeeping items and what the next steps are? And then Marie or Nikki, or maybe somebody could keep trying to contact him while we sort of move to wrap things up. Does that sound okay?
Mike, if you have his phone number, would you consider giving him a phone call? And then what he could do is he could repeat his vote out loud over your mic if you hold your phone to the computer.
Yep. And Barb, to your point, while we're waiting, I can just jump in on kind of the next steps for the next meeting. I think we have one scheduled on the 7th.
Correct.
What would happen at that meeting is to bring back
The 7th, yeah.
bring back a report to the committee for approval, and that report would be something that the district staff will draft that will contain the recommendation that you voted on tonight. And at that time, and it will basically be brought back for your approval. And as the chair mentioned, if there are specific suggestions that you would like to include or caveats or details that you'd like to add to the report, that can be done. So we'll have discussion, ideas, and ultimately vote on the final report that would be forwarded to the board. So that'll be I assume the report itself will be in the agenda so that you'll be able to review it in advance. And it will be fairly skeletal. It will say, the committee met on these occasions and this is what we voted on. This is the recommendation. And then you'll have the opportunity to review it and provide input if you want anything added. But the recommendation would not change given that the committee has now voted on it.
Right, but at that time, other items to consider can be included in that in terms of the report. And then the final language is done so that the whole committee is in agreement about what that document looks like that goes forward to the board.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. All right. Anything from Hector?
I have tried and he is not picking up his phone. So I thought he may be close by. I've checked and he's not. So I don't know what is happening with Hector right now.
So
let's see, maybe I can.
we record that in minutes, correct? Kelly, that one of the members was absent, or that their screen, they showed that they were logged in, but that they were absent from the vote?
Yeah, because the other option would be to say that he abstained, but I'm not sure. I mean, we don't know what's going on.
Abstain.
Right. So I think just to be completely open on what's happening, I would like it to be recorded in the minutes so that when people go back or some historical person, we have a historical record of why that happened. So I think that would be important. Okay. We can be careful on that language, and then you'll be able to approve it as well. In fact, he will be able to weigh in if he's at the following meeting as far as what specifically happened when the minutes are approved.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to know, because he may ask, will he have a chance to vote, or can he vote at the next meeting, or is he not eligible to vote at the next meeting?
I mean, at this point, the vote carries, right? Regardless of how he votes.
Okay.
So he could certainly give his opinion at that point, but it won't change the outcome of tonight's decision.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay.
And
Well,
certainly, he would certainly be able to vote on the report.
That's a new twist. That's something that's never happened before to me, or that I've observed. So we thank you. We approved a recommendation that will go forward to the board for the disposition and sale of the CARNEROS property. I want to thank all of you for your time and very thoughtful questions. And as we move forward to September 7th, in terms of completing the report, again, that is literally done as a team. We work on the language together, we work on the words together, and it is pretty much a single agenda item. And to complete that report, then we also make a motion and vote whether to support the report going forward. So just in terms of the next steps of that process. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I file the motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Thank you all
Aye.
very much. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so we will reconvene again on September 7th. Look for an email from Marie outlining the agenda, as well as a draft of the report that will be forthcoming on that. And I think Barb Franco and Eric Housley will have the distinction of meeting with us little bit more to help craft the report. So we thank you in advance for that, Barb and Eric.
Yay.
And no one else has to do that with them unless you'd like to.
Can't wait.
Okay.
All right. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
Yeah, nice job, everybody.
Good job.